Oh, there you are. I was wondering if you'd lost your way. So I said a little prayer for you to find safe passage here. And it looks like God done heard my words. Y'all come on in here now and make yourself comfortable. I was just doing a little dusting before y'all arrived, because I like to keep moving when I'm thinking. Perhaps not as much these days, but I've always been one to keep busy. You see, I'm a planner. So I was planning on what to do when y'all arrived. Now, I know you come here to hear about my time on the Underground Railroad. And you come here to hear all about how it was when I served in the Civil War. And you might even have some ideas of your own about freedom and what it means to be free. And I'm going to tell you all of them stories. I'll even answer your questions as best as I can. But now, while I was dusting and thinking, I got to this mantle over here, over my fireplace. Ain't much there, except in a few photographs or two and a few decorative things that's been given to me, but important things for sure. But I do wish I could put much more up on that mantle. You know, in just about every home, the mantle is where you put things that represent you and your family. The things on your mantle tell a story about you and what's important to you. Now, thinking about my mantle made me remember a time when I was a young girl dusting off my mistress's mantle. Now, this was when I went by my birth name, Araminta, or Minty for short. It was the first time I'd ever been to that big house. And that's what we call the master and the mistress's house when I was a slave girl. Oh, that mistress was a mean woman. And she meant for me to understand that. When I got to that big house, the first thing I saw was a whip on that mantle. Now that was meant as a warning for me. If I was to do anything wrong, I knew I would be whipped. Well, I'd never been to the big house before, and I didn't know what I was doing. The way I dusted and broomed, threw dust all up in that air just to settle back down over everything like I hadn't even dusted or broomed at all. And when the mistress saw that dust, she accused me of neglecting my work. And sure enough, she took that whip from that mantle. I was whipped 5 times before breakfast that day. And she must have used all of her strength. For that little woman, she left me with scars clearly to this day. Well, I screamed and I cried and I tried to explain to her that I had done my work. But she wouldn't stop whipping me. And it wasn't until her sister came in, hearing all the screams and the cries, to see what all the commotion was about. And upon telling her that I neglected my work, well, the mistress's sister looked at me. And you know, it was perhaps the first time I saw a white woman take any kind of pity on me. So she asked the mistress if she could handle me. And the mistress told her to go ahead. Well, the sister just asked me to show her how I was cleaning. And I showed her. And she saw how I was doing it all wrong and corrected me. But that was all it took. But still, every time I cleaned that big house, that whip remained on that mantle. Now you see, the whip was the most important thing to that mistress, or rather what the whip meant to her. That whip gave the mistress power. I recall seeing that mistress sleeping with that whip too in hand, always keeping that power close. And she used it on a little child no older than you perhaps. And some of you might be wondering why, as you should. Why use such force against a child? Well, to the enslavers, the so-called masters and mistresses, it was important that a slave never have any power. A slave, to their mind, ain't no person. A slave is just a piece of property. A slave can't make no decision for themselves. A slave can't be educated and can't even think for themselves. Because if a slave had any power, oh, they would use that power for their liberation. And if a slave has power, the slave can organize and fight back. But if a slave be beaten down so low that they can't see nothing but that whip, then they'll never have enough power to overcome the big-time enslaver. Well, let me tell you, the The masters and the mistresses, oh, they underestimate the slaves, sure enough. Just as God made the white children, well, he made the black children too. And in each of us, there's something that can't be bought or taught. It's given to us from birth, the desire for and the right to freedom. Ain't nothing that can take that away. So on my mantle, I want my story to be told, which is the story of my people. So the first thing I put on my mantle is a lantern. Not to light my way as you might think. Couldn't be seen in the dark. No, this lantern was a sign. And when I would reach the safe house or somewhere, I'd be protected by kind folks that would put a lantern out to tell me, yes, you made it. You made it to the safe house. And I tell you now, the first time I come about seeing that lantern for the first time, oh, running away, oh yeah, was mighty dangerous for a slave. And if should you be caught running away, you might be sold down south somewhere. And being in Maryland, I had the advantage of being closer to the northern free states. But if I was to be caught and sold down south somewhere like Georgia, oh my, the distance would be much greater to overcome, nearly impossible. But I was going to take my chances. But I needed some opportunity. Well, I remember it was around 1849 when I heard that my brothers Ben and Henry was about to be sold to a Georgia man, to be sold down south. And during this time, me and my brothers were about to be hired out to another household. So if we escaped while we was hired out, then our owners wouldn't even notice our absence for a few days. I had been thinking and thinking about escaping for some time now. And I heard and I learned about safe houses along the way called the Underground Railroad. Now this wasn't no actual railroad, and it wasn't underground either. No, we couldn't talk about escaping outright. So we had to use them there coded languages. And those who helped the slaves escape were called the conductors or the station masters. Each time, each safe house along the way to the north was called a station or a depot. And the people who were to be doing the escaping were called a cargo. We had to plan using them codes too, sometimes referring to the Bible, like telling someone to prepare to escape and be ready to board the old ship of Zion. Now that meant that someone was going to be there soon to guide you along the way. And sometimes there would be other ways to use them coded languages too, even when writing letters. I remember one conductor wrote a letter to the next station master that they should expect 3 bales of black wool to arrive. Well, I'm sure you didn't already guess that them 3 bales of black wool, what they really meant? 3 escaped slaves. Well, y'all, at this time, I had already been married. My husband, John Tubman, did not agree with my ideas of escape. But when it came time for him to go, John refused to go with me. I couldn't take too long trying to convince him either. And so I got provisions ready to head on off with my 2 brothers. And I can't tell you how frightened we were. But I knew that I couldn't show no fear. I had to be strong. But as we got closer and closer to the darkness, further into the woods, my brothers had second thoughts too. The fear of being caught and punished got to them, and they decided to go on back. Oh, I was angry with them. I was sad, thinking that they'd even go along with me. And I was afraid that I might never see them again, just like my 2 sisters who had been sold off years ago. But I had to keep on going. And soon I was making my way through them woods and the darkness of the night with the North Star to guide me. I made my way through them rivers, knowing it runs north to the south. Me and them woods was already well familiar though, from my days of working and traveling to places where I was hired out to. But soon, I'd gone so far in them dark woods that they became unfamiliar to me. And I just had to trust in the good Lord and that North Star. And when daylight come, I would find a safe place to hide. And I tried to find places to shelter myself to keep away from them there mosquitoes. And it took bat nests, because if I go to the bat nest, I know that the bats would eat up the mosquitoes. And they would eat up the mosquitoes before they would eat me. I had just enough to keep me going. But most of the time, I had to eat dried muskrat, what you call marsh rabbit. I can't say it was my favorite meal though, but I was thankful for every bit of food that I could get by with. And during my rest, I dreamed them vivid dreams of flying over fields and towns and rivers and mountains until I came to a great big old fence. I knew that to be the line. Though that fence was freedom. Oh Lord, that was freedom. And behind that fence was ladies all dressed in bright white, with their arms stretched out to me, ready to pull me on over to freedom. And sometimes they'd be singing them songs like we sang back there on the plantation. Keep your hands on the plow, hold on. Yes, Lord. And when night came again, I just keep on walking through the woods. I couldn't risk being seen on the roads. I must have walked about 10 miles each night. But every step I walked, I knew I was bringing me closer to freedom. A few nights into my journey, I came up on a big old field with a house way back there in the distance. And on the gate leading to the house was a very dim lantern. But oh, how bright it shone to me. I made it to the safe house, y'all. I was welcomed, fed, clothed, and given a pallet bed, better than any bed I'd ever slept on. And I wasn't ever treated so kindly by white folk before. But my journey was long from over. It would take me about 2 or 3 weeks to make it to the free state of Pennsylvania. Now, other abolitionists along the Underground Railroad, they helped me. And finally, I reached the line. I made it out of Egypt land, what we call the slave state, y'all. And there wasn't no ladies either reaching out for me. But I was still overcome with joy, and them tears just streamed all down my face. I got down on my knees and I prayed, thanking the good Lord for his guidance. I made my way into Philadelphia, to the part of town where the free Negroes live. Oh, shuck. I saw black vendors selling their wares and roasting them oysters and chestnuts and corn, steaming big old pots of vegetables and meat, milliners, seamstresses, stores, barbershops, laborers, sellers, and marinas. Oh, I could not believe my eyes. But I knew I was still at risk of being caught. And there was no paradise in Philadelphia. Because at any time now, a Negro, born free or escaped, could still be captured and sold off. So I made my way to another safe house of a Quaker family and laid myself low for a good while. Oh, I received help too from the Anti-Slavery Society and the local churches around there. I even got word back to my family that I had made it. Short messages though, to be told from one conductor to another and to another until they reached their destination. After much needed rest, oh Lord, I found myself employment, doing hard works, cleaning house, laundering, laboring. Now, I'm going to tell y'all, this wasn't the first time that I had worked for a payment. When I was hired out, back with my old master, back on that plantation, I had to give him half of my payment, then I could keep the rest. But being paid in full, though still not very much, was a good old feeling. Life in Philadelphia was, of course, much better than back there in Maryland. But I missed my family something terrible. Knowing how much better off I was made me feel worse off, for my family's still back there trapped in bondage. I dreamed of going back there and bringing them back to freedom with me. But even Philadelphia wasn't safe for long. With more and more people escaping to free state, a law was passed called the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Now this law meant that law enforcement could bring any Negro suspected of being a slave back to their owner, or else face a fine of $1,000. That's right, $1,000. Anyone found helping a slave escape or hide would also be fined $1,000 and go to jail for 6 months. But soon there would be talk of Canada to become the new promised land. So now I believe in December 1850, I got word that my niece Kizzy was going to be sold down south with her 2 little children. God told me I was to go back and rescue Kizzy and them children. He told me to go back to Maryland, back to Egypt land, to let my people go. And I listened. You see, the abolitionists I knew in Philadelphia, they helped me plan where to go and how to get back there. I went through the city of Baltimore with no one even noticing me. But going back through the woods this time, back through the streams and the rivers, back into the darkness of the night, felt different this time. I was not even thinking about myself. I was thinking about Kizzy and them 2 little children. I was thinking about my brothers, my mother, my father, and my husband. And that feeling made all the fear just leave me. Nothing else mattered anymore. And I made it. I made it to Maryland and found Kizzy and her children. They had been snuck on a boat by Kizzy's husband, a free Negro too, who was to later join them and reunite with his family. Oh, I got Kizzy and them children to the line. And just like I did, they rejoiced. Oh Lord, they rejoiced. And just like I did, Kizzy took on a new name. She became Mary Ann. You see, God proved to me that if I listened to him, oh yeah, he would guide the way. And after Mary Ann, I went back a second time and rescued one of my brothers and 2 other men. I successfully got them to the line as well. And on my 3rd trip, oh, I was so sure that my husband John would be glad to see me and come back to Philadelphia with me. But that wasn't so. We'd been away from each other no more than 2 years. And I was sure glad that he would be ready to come back with me. And when I reached that plantation, I learned that John had taken on another wife. They even had a family together. Well, of course I was devastated. But soon, all that anger replaced all them tears. I found myself being without him. And I thought, if he could do without me, then I could surely do without him. And I reckon I already was, wasn't I? So I put all them their dreams behind me of having my husband back. And soon God spoke to me in a different dream. He told me to help those other slaves. But I pleaded with him. I said, oh Lord, no, don't ask me. Please take somebody else. But God said, I want you, Harriet Tubman. And I listened. I did. And so now, that brings me to my second item I think I would put on my mantle. A pistol. Well, does it surprise you that I had a pistol? Now, you might think it was to protect me from slave catchers, and I might well have used it if I'd been caught. But no, this pistol was not to protect me. It was to protect the slaves from escaping from themselves. You see, I began to take on more and more people outside my family, acquaintances and strangers, and this time we was going to go all the way to Canada. Now, I understood the fear that people felt, and I felt it myself when I first escaped. But if we were to be successful, there was no going back. And on few occasions, sometimes somebody in my party become overwhelmed with fear. They say that they couldn't move another muscle, or that they were so exhausted they couldn't even make another step. Well, I couldn't have that. Why, if they'd went back, they might have gave away the secrets of the Underground Railroad and put other folks at risk. And on those occasions, I had to brandish my weapon. You see, I never lost a passenger, and I never ever ran my train off track. And you know what? We made it to Canada all right. We made it to Canada. Oh yes, I grew in my own strength and my own courage with my trust in the Lord a time and time and time again. And I returned to Maryland and Virginia to lead my people to freedom. And we found all sorts of ways to hide cargo. Sometimes we would hide in safe houses, hidden rooms, trap doors, and sometimes they even hide us in the attic or the cellar or the barn. And we traveled in the winter when nights were long and dark. And during the rest of the year, y'all, I be planning my next trip. Oh, I just plan, and I plan, and I plan. And I even spend some time in Canada, making money too, as a cook and as a laundress. I didn't stay in place too long. No, I couldn't. I had to go from place to place, staying not long as to not being caught. Well, now, they tell me the newspapers talked a whole lot about me, I'm told. They called me Moses. And when I was staying with abolitionists, I was treated, like some kind of queen. All these white folks wanted to hear my story. And so I told them. And afterwards, I was glad. Because oftentimes, they would even provide money toward my cause. And so, when winter come, I would make more and more trips to the South. Pistol in hand, oh yes. And I picked up so many ways of keeping my cargo safe. Now let me tell you one more little story. One time, I was on a train, dressed with a big old sunbonnet, and I carried with me 2 of them live chickens, like I was on a job. Well, who did I see? A man I was hired out to years ago on the plantation. A man who knew me and could recognize me well. And as he was passing by, I yanked on them 2 chickens' legs, and them chickens started squawking and squealing like mad. So I bent over to tend to them chickens and to make my hat flop over my head to block my face, and he just passed right on by. I learned good ways to communicate too. I learned to communicate really well with songs. I would direct my cargo through song sometime. I would walk along the road just singing, and the cargo would just follow me on off the road too, just like that. And depending on what kind of song I sang, they would know if they could show themselves or not. There were times when we'd even hide in a wagon. Now that little story is a funny one too, but let me tell you what happened on that one. It was dangerous being on the road. So one time, a group of Negro bricklayers, they hid us in the bottom of their wagon. And when the bricklayers crossed the path with the guards, they just walk on past on that bridge, just moseying right on through. Guards never know a single thing. And sometimes we'd have to hide in even stranger places. But the worst one of all, y'all, oh Lord, that was a really scary one. And a dangerous one too. We had 25 people. And we had to hide in a swamp all day long without food. It was cold and it was wet. Yet another occasion when I had to brandish my weapon. And we made it. So let me see, I'm thinking here. 1, 2, oh yes. The last thing I would put on my mantle is a copy of the 13th Amendment. Though I cannot read it, knowing that it meant freedom and the end of slavery was enough for me, y'all. Especially as I had already served in the American Civil War. I served as a nurse, that's right. I served as a spy, and I rescued more than 750 slaves during the Combahee River Raid. That's right, 750. But I was so glad to see that war end with a Union victory. And not long after that, when the 13th Amendment was passed, slavery ended, I felt such jubilation and reverence. I was happy. It'd been all kind of men in that war. Black men, white men. I saw them die just as well. And not all of them was fighting to end slavery, but that result was more than I could handle, and it was enough for me. But let me tell you, our struggle, it ain't over. That was simply a new beginning on a long, long way, a long, long journey to this day right here. And my story does not end there either. To this day, I fight for freedom. I use my words and my stories for Negroes, for women, and for children all over God's world. And so you see, when a visitor like you comes to my home, I hope that one day I can have a mantle set with the pieces of my story. I hope that when you visit, you will know what is important to me. I hope that when you consider all the things important to you, that you make it so. What would you sit upon your mantle? What would the world, the country, sit upon this mantle? You must decide for yourself and make it so. Thank you, and please come again.